Hello everyone, this is Sanjay Poonen. I'm the CEO and President of Cohesity, and I'm honored to be talking to all of you security professionals about what I see happening in the state of the security industry today. I have been in enterprise software and technology for well over 2 decades. A good part of that life has been in analytics, artificial intelligence, security. I was, prior to this role at Cohesity, I was COO at VMware, drove a lot of the security business there. I led that, including many of the acquisitions we did like AirWatch and mobile security and Carbon Black, and drove an end-to-end perspective there. And I also ran the governance, risk and compliance and security related businesses at SAP. I'm an active investor in many security startups. I'm on the board of Sneak, and we're taking our company here into a sort of a direction that's at the junction of security management and AI of data, primarily starting with sort of secondary data backup, and then really I think the extent of where one could go is tremendous. And what I wanted to share with you is a little bit of my perspective. As you look at this security industry, the amazing thing about it is it's so big, 100 billion, at least half of it is software, rest of it is platform, but it's very fragmented. And often kind of the thing that's frustrating to many security professionals is you feel like you've really got to have many tablets to stay well, so to speak, because everyone's trying to pitch you their favorite tablet. In fact, you kind of call it things like vaccines and antivirus and things of those kinds. So there's a lot of analogies to healthcare, when quite frankly, the most important thing we could do is make security part of a platform, make it part of our diet. So one of the things that I've been really keenly focused on is making security more built in rather than bolted on. So that at the end of the day, if you have security part of your, kind of health, you don't have to have 50 different tablets or medicines. You just make it part of your diet. And then you may have a few supplemental vitamins, but if you're doing your meat, your vegetables, your fruit, the kind of things that you do to then take your sort of hygienic steps, brushing your teeth, keeping yourself clean, washing your hands, all that kind of stuff, you don't have to have a lot of additional. So that's really a key part to thing. And my advice to CISOs is to work with platform vendors and to work with companies who have a platform vision as opposed to a lot of things that are bolted on. So, if you look at the segments of security, there's network security. There's some great companies like Palo Alto, endpoint security, some great companies like CrowdStrike and Microsoft. Identity and access, there's some great companies like Okta. Microsoft also plays there with Azure Active Directory. Now I think it's called Entra. Security analytics, there's a number of companies that are trying to kind of create a lake, whether it's Splunk or now Sentinel or Google Chronicle. There's a lot of cloud security efforts which are embryonic but growing. Secure Access Service Edge. There's a whole area. Zscaler has done some great work there. And then there's a whole world of how do you protect information and data. That's really what we're certainly focused on. But the key is, as you think about platforms, if you're going to go with a boutique security company, it's really important that you build a partnership perspective with a company that has a platform vision. And that's really what we are encouraging companies to think about. In our area, probably the most important thing to be aware of, the thing that's changed the landscape is ransomware. And there's a ransomware attempt, at least, every 20 seconds. Not all of them are successful, but there's an attempt. And these are usually nation-state actors. It takes often 270 plus days to recover from them. At least half the data today is being stored in public clouds. And often there's a lot of data that's being stored in many of those places that's not really leveraged. It's sort of sitting in some, sort of like what feels like the back of a closet or a garage and never really leveraged. So the first approach we think that needs to be taken to the way in which you protect data is like those sort of medieval times of how you protected a fortress. You had layers of defense, and if you could get past the various different moats into the inner sanctum and get to the kings or queens, crown jewels, you scored. And that's in essence what a lot of sort of layered defenses have to protect against, both in a proactive and a reactive. And we recommend from the research we've done, the NIST framework is a really good one, where if you're thinking proactively, you want to have an identify identify, detect, and protect approach. And then if you're thinking sort of reactively, you want to have a respond and recovery. And as you think about each of these layers of defense, whether it's physical security, network security, endpoint security, application security is an area where you're kind of looking at source code and all of that thing that could be in the software supply chain. Like I said, I'm on the board of a company called Sneak that does a lot of good work there. But once you get past that, the inner sanctum, it has to be protecting your data. And protect your data both reactively and proactively from these ransomware. But just as important, we believe, is being able to do the management and security of data, especially things like security data in a combined fashion, in one platform. Most often, if you look today, you have separate companies trying to do data protection, things like backup and recovery, separate other companies trying to do data security, things like classification, threat hunting, separate other companies to store your file and object systems, and then a whole separate set of companies when you want to get insight and analytics or e-discovery into that data. Increasingly, the idea of a platform is the likelihood of there being a surface area of more attacks just goes down the more. So platform approaches ultimately win, we believe, in the market. You also want to be thinking very aggressively about how do you implement technologies that take out cost from the equation. What you don't want to be doing is layering one upon the other, especially hardware-driven approaches often layer more cost. The beauty of software-defined approaches, I saw this at VMware, I certainly saw a lot of that at SAP. These are software-defined approaches that can be run often on commodity hardware, take advantage of things like virtualization, and have automation and AI built into them. You want to be looking at your total cost of ownership, which is a combination of hardware, software, and labor services, and look for techniques and approaches that dramatically reduce that total cost of ownership. The second you want to also be thinking about is not just TCO, but ROI, return on investment. These are two sides of the same coin. You want to be looking for approaches that are 10x faster, 10x more productive in the way in which you think about how you get returns. So if you're looking at an approach, for example, to do endpoint security, you want to be looking at agents that are very, very thin. If you want to look at firewall approaches, you want to have things that are extremely efficient at detecting, speed of doing it. In our area of data protection backup, you want to be testing for speed of backup, but also speed of recovery. How can you do a mass recovery really fast? And the beauty of many of these scale-out architectures now is it's sort of like a parallel processor. You can do much of these data protection activities, backup, recovery, archival, just at, sort of like a supercomputer, much in parallel. I think the other approach that's super important is being able to have just like healthcare, an approach to security that's a lot like healthcare. In our world, for example, if you're thinking about a data security lens, we think there's 3 or 4 key elements to it. One is an isolation solution that's air gap, immutable, so on and so forth. Well, what's the analogy in the healthcare word? It's sort of like when we were facing, the pandemic, we all isolated. We kind of, got really, really good at the idea of quarantining. That equivalent is the way in which you think about a cyber vault. Super important. What else did we do when we faced this pandemic? We built a really good way of testing. COVID testing almost. We could, if you wanted to get on a plane, you tested. If you wanted to get into an office, you tested. And the ability to threat scan and data scan at scale, doing this in large amounts of data. And because it's often secondary data, you can do this overnight. You can do it without a way in which you impact the performance of primary data. What else did we got good at? We got really good at being able to test our elderly people for a variety of different sort of chronic diseases, whether it was cholesterol tests or very sophisticated tests. That equivalent in the world of data is classification of data. So you want to be thinking about that. Now, we're very fortunate in our partnership with Qualys. We are partnering with them to get their feeds and kind of get the scanning engines that they acquired a company called Blue Hexagon that we embed. We also partner with companies like Big ID for classification. We've embedded that classification engine. Now, the beautiful thing to you as a customer is you get the benefit of some of these embedded capabilities at no extra cost. It's sort of like a Tesla or Volvo being extra safe because it uses the world's best, sort of brake pads or maybe self-driving or engines or software, so on and so forth. So that's what we believe. You also want to be thinking really holistically about how do you have anybody you're partnering with or working with as a vendor that integrates into everybody else's security. If they think that they are the be-all and end-all and can't integrate into your, for example, security operations center, then they've not built an approach where the platform integrates with somebody else. And that's what we believe is very important. For example, in this world of data security, you need to have ways by which if somebody else in the security operations center, whether it's Sentinel or Splunk or something else, you're able to get feeds very naturally from this. That's the approach certainly we've taken in terms of picking the best companies that are category leaders in their space. Whether it's Palo Alto or CrowdStrike or Okta or Microsoft or Qualys or anybody else. The final thing I think is super important is being able to think about this. Again, come back to the healthcare analogy of having a group of doctors that can advise you. What's the equivalent? Build an advisory council of some of the world's best CISOs, chief security officers that advise you. You want to always be thinking about a first, a second, a third advice. We did that in our own firm. One of the first calls I made was to Kevin Mandia to join my board. I think when there's sort of cybercrime going on, I affectionately call him the Sherlock Holmes of our industry. Boards and governments call him, and he's added tremendous value to my thinking on security and certainly our company's thinking. And then we formed a security advisory council. These are people like Kelly Bissell from Microsoft, or Alex Stamos, who was the CISO at Facebook, or Jason Chan, who was the CISO at Netflix, or Sheila Jordan, who is at Honeywell, or Marion Bailey at NSA, and many others. And we constantly look to grow that group. I've always believed in the counsel of many, there's great amount of wisdom. So those are just a few of the ways in which I would encourage all of you to build a security, kind of best practices. Let me kind of end on sort of how do we make security part of the hygiene of how we do it. It's a lot like brushing your teeth or kind of washing your hands, keeping yourself clean, so to speak. There's a bunch of hygienic things that we need to teach everybody to do, which have nothing to do with product. For example, we need to educate everybody about multi-factor authentication and the use of strong passwords. How do you all set that up so that, even your parents or your grandparents know what a second factor of authentication is? And increasingly, if you think about a fingerprint or a retina scan, you'd have to pluck my eye out and cut my thumb off to get that second or third factor. We want multi-factor authentication to be pervasive to the world, and that's really important. If you're going to put data in a public place, especially if it's consumer data, make sure it's encrypted. Make sure it's not easily accessible. Again, multi-factor authentication should be a gate, but the data itself being encrypted tremendously helps, if you would, preventing that surface area. Segmentation, micro-segmentation, a very important principle by which you can ensure that only the people that need to see certain apps, you don't expose the entire surface area to them. You only segment what needs to be given them. Hygienic things that allow you, for example, to understand where you put cloud controls. There's a whole area of cloud security posture. Understanding what does security posture mean, whether it's for cloud, whether it's for applications, whether it's for data. The whole topic of security posture management has many facets, cloud, application, and data. So educating more and more of our folks on how to handle this. And then I think it's also important that when we have an attack, whether it's SolarWinds or WannaCry, Petya, the Colonial Pipeline, all of these, unfortunately, some companies have gotten affected by them, but it's important that we go from any of these disasters or events that happen and we learn from them. So I often read the anatomy of the attack, understand what happened, and make sure your chief security officers, who are answerable often now to boards and audit committees, are educating everybody on what they've learned from this in very simple terms. You shouldn't have to be a very sophisticated scientist to understand the anatomy of what happened in an attack. Just the same way that if there's a police report on some kind of burglary or a sort of a terrorist attack, we want to know what was the details about how that happened and how we protect ourselves. Security is the same thing, like the way in which we handle a terrorist attack to how we handle a healthcare crisis too. So thank you very much for these few moments that I've been able to share with you the nature of how we all can protect the world better. Cybersecurity isn't often a life and death situation like often terrorist activity is. I mean, it could be one if the bad guys get to nuclear plants or biological weapons, but it can certainly cause tremendous amount of economic harm. And we want to keep the world a safer place from both, sort of life-death events, but also from economic harm. And that's certainly something that I've dedicated a good part of my life to. We're honored to be working with Qualys and many other leaders in security. For those of you who are attending or not attending RSA, I hope this is a good event and you learned a few things. You can always come to cohesity.com to learn more. Watch a video about us on YouTube, which gives you sort of a 15-minute story of what we're doing. I didn't want to make this a Cohesity commercial, much more so a thought leadership perspective on security. And I look forward to staying in touch with many of you in the industry. All the very best. Thank you.